Welcome to the Honest Reflection Podcast with your hosts, Cody Hairston and Nick Woods. Here, we want to help you reflect on your week and be honest about your relationship with God. We hope you enjoy this episode. Hey guys, glad to have you in our conversation again this week. Nick is here with us again. How's it going, Nick?
Going good. Good to be with you. Good to be able to chat a little bit and reflect a little bit on how the fruit of the Spirit can be seen in us. And we're going to continue our conversation and reflection on goodness. If you missed any of our previous episodes, you can find them on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And of course, if you like what we're doing, you can subscribe, rate our pod. That helps us, helps others find us, and helps us get the word out to others. Today, we're going to continue looking, as I said, about God's goodness, living God's goodness within our family specifically. And of course, we always need to try to do right by others. That's kind of how we've defined this idea of goodness that we're trying to think about. And that especially includes our families. So, Cody, where do you want to start today thinking about goodness within our families?
Yeah, so we start with just the fact that the goal of a family is to do right by one another within that family and to promote goodness within the family as well. And I appreciate that you mentioned that, this is especially important to do with our family. I think a lot of times the families can get put on the back burner, right? We think about doing good and doing right by all these other people, but then it's like the folks closest to us. Sometimes we don't do right by them, but that's the goal. The goal of just the family unit in general is to really to be a beacon of goodness, and for goodness to be something that's always present within the family. So the goal of a family is not to make the most money. It's not to be the happiest family. It's not to have the best athletes. It's to do good, right? By God's standard of goodness. And you see this several different times in the Old Testament. One of my favorite passages is something that God says about Abraham in Genesis 18:19. He says, "For I have chosen him so that he will command his children and his house after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing what is right and just. This is how the Lord will fulfill to Abraham what he has promised him." And so part of God choosing Abraham is because he knew that he would teach his children. He would teach the people coming after him how to do good, how to be right, how to be just. And in fact, all of the promises that God gave to Abraham, they're fulfilled through Abraham doing that, through Abraham teaching that goodness to his children, through Abraham's family being good. All of the promises to Abraham are fulfilled. You see it with Israel as well. I think about Deuteronomy 6, when God is giving those commands there. He tells them to repeat these things to their children. So all of the laws that were taught to them when God's teaching them how to be good, he says, hey, you should teach your children this, because goodness is just supposed to be present within a family. And so as we do right by our family members, as we teach them these things, it does teach them. It teaches and encourages them to do good themselves. So obviously parents teach their children how to be good. That's just kind of the basics of discipline. But you can even encourage your children to do good. As you constantly do good for them, I think goodness is just like a natural thing that can occur in your children as well. Obviously, you're going to need to be intentional about it, but I think it gets to the point where you don't have to try to force goodness. It kind of happens there, right? That's what it looks like to have goodness within the family. We don't always think about this, but you can even teach your spouse how to be good. I know I personally have learned how to be good from Macy. There have been things that Macy has done, and I'm like, oh man, yeah, I need to be doing that thing too. And so guess what? Then I start doing the thing. And of course, you can encourage your spouse to do good as well. But this is what God is looking for from families. He wants our families to be these beacons of goodness, for goodness to always be present within our families. So the love and the respect that's supposed to happen between spouses, it brings about good. Fathers, you don't exasperate your children. Children, you obey your parents, for this is right. This is good. So he wants us to do good. And I think that makes sense, because this is the exact goal that God has always had for his family as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you look throughout the different examples in the Bible story, and I'm thinking about, like you mentioned, Abraham, I think about the Israelites. God's goal is that goodness be seen through his family, that they would do right by others. When you think about Israel as a nation, they were placed in this location physically on the map. You look at it and you're like, why were they put there? So everybody could have contact with them. Everybody came through the land of Israel, traveling from Egypt to Babylon to wherever they were going. They would be able to interact with God's children. And his goal for those children that he had placed in this land was that they would be good and do right by others. And as we've said previously, God's standard for goodness is it's how we're measuring what it means to be good, what it is to be good and right and to do right. And so when we look at the Israelites and we see that expectation, we can see times where God would rebuke them because they weren't doing right by others. Ultimately, they were taken into captivity because they weren't doing right to each other, people in their own family. They were mistreating and not doing good things to people in their own family. And he punished them most severely for that, and taking them into captivity. His expectation for his family is that they would do right by others and do right to others. And so when we see how God approaches the different situations with the Israelites, whether it's when they're coming out of Egypt and he would rebuke them, or he would hear their complaints and give them what they needed, and then later on he would hear their complaints and punish them or rebuke them for not seeing what he had already done for them. Whether we look at the different examples as they become a nation and he lets them be dominated by other people, and then he'll send a judge in to relieve that. God is giving them an example. Hey, I want you to do what's right. I'm trying to teach you to do what's right. Every situation dictates what needs to be done. And so we see that God shows us he understands his children, he knows his children, and he knows what they need to best promote his goodness in the world, and he's trying to give that to them. Our family should have a goal, I think, in the same way of bearing the goodness of God.
Yeah, again, it just all makes sense because God wants his family to be good. That's always been true. You think about Old Testament Israel, which you just talked about. We even talked about it in the church. Like the church, God's family today is supposed to be good. And so that's God as the father making sure that his family is good. That's the way that it's supposed to go. So I think about that for me as a father, right? It is my job to make sure my family is good. That's the goal of us being a family. And so the Hairstons are supposed to be good, and that needs to be my mentality when doing anything with the family. If I have any other goal, it's going to affect how I do things, right? If my goal within the family is to make the most money, well, guess what? There are going to be some things that are good that I'm going to neglect. If my goal is to maybe just make sure that there's no disagreements at all, that's going to change how I act. There may be some things that are good to do, the right thing to do in a situation. I might not do that because, oh, it may cause some sort of conflict, right? But again, I'm supposed to be bringing about good. If my goal within the family is to make sure that I'm getting what I need at all times, again, that's going to affect how I operate. There may be something that's right to do, but I'm not going to do it because it it doesn't directly benefit me in one way or another. Again, it's all about making sure that we have that goal of bringing about goodness in the family. And so as a parent, it's my job to bring about goodness in the family, and that starts with me doing right by Macy and the kids. Right? I cannot say that I am trying to bring about good if I'm not doing right by them. If I'm not treating Macy right, if I'm not treating the kids right. Now, obviously, keeping this goal in mind can be tough. I'm not saying that I get it right all the time or that any of our listeners are going to get it right all the time. It can be tough because you get in the moment and you get angry about something, or maybe you get really excited about something else, and so that thought of, hey, what is the right thing to do here just doesn't creep up. So again, I recognize there's going to be things that make this hard, but it's so necessary. We have to be about doing good to our family and being good within our family. Sometimes I think it's also about going above and beyond to promote goodness. So instead of just literally just saying, okay, what's the right thing to do here? Sometimes you got to take it a step further and think about, okay, well, maybe this is a neutral thing, but is this going to be something that's going to promote goodness, right? So for me, is there something that I can do to take something off Macy's plate so she can do even more good, right? Maybe she's slammed with some chores around the house, and that's prohibiting her from being able out to go help our neighbors, right? Well, if I come in and I say, hey, I'm going to do this thing, well, now she has more freedom to do some of those good things, right? So you see, it's about just having that mindset of, okay, I need to be promoting goodness. I need to be getting the kids involved with things so that they can do good, right? There may be an opportunity for me to do good, and it would be good for me to bring my kids along so that they can see what it looks like. Again, it's just making sure that we have it at the front of our minds. Hey, my family needs to be about doing good. I think if we can get this down, our families can be a light to our neighbors around us, right? The Hairstons, we should be known as fair. We should be known as helpful. And if that is true, if we are doing good for our neighbors, a lot of good is going to come to our neighbors' families. A lot of good is going to come to the people around us as well. But of course, all those good things, they can only happen if we're intentional. If we're intentional about our goals of bringing goodness.
Yeah, if this is a goal for our family, then it's going to be, no matter which role or position or however we find ourselves, like our goal is going to be, I want to do right by others. So even in this unit, in this situation, what are we known as? What can people say about us? Are we bearing the fruit of goodness? And I think also as parents, we would think, for those who are parents who are listening and you're trying to raise kids, you're trying to raise kids to be and to bear goodness. And that's a specific aspect of this. But our goal with our kids then is to teach them and to train them. The proverb writer says in Proverbs 22 and verse 6, train up a child in the way he should go, and even when he is old, he will not depart from it. We want to train them up in all the aspects of the fruit of the Spirit. But as we're thinking about doing right by others and goodness, we want to hopefully train them to bear goodness and to be known as people that are doing good and doing right by others. And our training may look different given different circumstances, because our goal is the first thing in our mind, not the outcome necessarily in that moment, but the goal long term. Our goodness says that we are trying to do right by our children. We may realize that a situation may not call for we may realize that a situation may not call for discipline, but it may call for training. It may call for a conversation. It may call for us to sit down and not provoke them to wrath, but to train them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord, as Cody mentioned earlier. Our goal is to do right by them. I think that's going to mean for us that we need to take a minute and step back sometimes as parents. We're just thinking about this aspect of parents to children. Like, our job is to train them to be good. And that means we got to put ourselves out of the way, even in that situation, and bear this fruit of goodness. We take a minute to breathe and see that there are times when both and all are needed. Everything is needed in that situation, discipline, training, and everything else. The goal is to do right by our children, not be right in front of them. I was thinking about that. I think this goes to any situation. I think we've kind of talked about this when we were talking about between our brothers and sisters in Christ and in other situations. Like, our goal in our relationships is not to be right necessarily, but to do right. And I think the temptation is, as parents, is like, we're going to bring down a show of force in order to let them see that we're right in that moment. We're going to let them see our anger. We're going to bow up on them in frustration. Instead, we need to take a step back. What is our goal? What are we trying to accomplish? Who are we trying to be? We're trying to be a family who is known for goodness. For Katie and I, raising our three boys, we don't need to have the goal of always being right in every situation. We don't need to have the goal of always getting in the last word. We don't need to have the goal of always having an answer in everything, in every situation. The goal is to breed an atmosphere where there's a deep care for God and for his goodness. And we have to remember that goal. And the goal is that we want to be known as bearing the fruit of the Spirit in every situation. But especially as we're talking about goodness here, as we train our children, that applies. I was thinking about this, and I'll probably bring it up again, but in Philippians 2, Paul, and just generally talking about the Christian attitude, he says, do nothing from selfishness or empty conceit, but with humility of mind, regard one another as more important than yourselves. Do not merely look out for your own personal interest, but also for the interest of others. When we're raising our children to be God's children, ultimately, we got to look out for their interest more important than our own. When we're in a marriage relationship and we're talking to our spouse, we got to look out for their interest and view it as more important than our own, as Cody mentioned. That's the humility that it takes, the humility that it takes maybe to breed goodness. So I think our children will bear the fruit of the Spirit if we're teaching them to walk by the Spirit in their lives.
Yeah, I read this recently, and I wish I could remember where I read it so I could give them proper credit, but they were talking about how the difference between doing good consistently and not is really just taking the time to think about it. So in the heat of the moment, when you're, ready to lash out, if you can take that step back, like you were just mentioning, it really does change how consistently you're able to do good. I know in the heat of the moment, it really will dramatically change how you act. If you, instead of doing the first thing that comes to your mind, taking that step back and saying, okay, let me think about this. Let me think about, hey, what is the right thing to do here? What is the good thing to do here? And this is especially crucial within the family because again, doing good and doing right has such have such like long lasting and such huge effects on our family and the people that know our families and so on and so forth. And so this is something that we've got to do ourselves. We've got to take a step back and really think, okay, what is the right thing to do? But it's also something that we've got to teach and encourage in our family members too, right? In our spouses and in our children. We got to teach our children to do this. We've got to take that step back and say, okay, what is the good and right thing to do here? Because I think when everyone is on the same page, it gives you the foundation to have a good family because everybody's going to be on the same page of saying, you know what? I need to do what's right for you, just like you need to do what's right for me. We collectively need to do what's right for our neighbors. Everybody's just on the same page. I was thinking about it. The worst things that can happen in a family would be prevented if you just ask that question of, hey, what's the right thing to do here? Right? Think about adultery, right? Somebody steps out on their spouse. I guarantee you, had they taken a step back and said, you know what is the right thing to do for my spouse in this moment, they wouldn't do that thing, right? Because again, it's about taking that step back and detoxifying from whatever environment you happen to find yourself in. And the same would go with any other extreme problems you might find in a family. If it's an abusive situation, anything like that, it's taken care of if you just step back and say, what's the right thing to do here? I think it also takes care of the small things too. Obviously it takes care of those big things, but even like the small things, like maybe there's a time where you've said something to your spouse or to your kid and you wish you hadn't said it like that, or you wish you hadn't even said that thing. Well, man, had you just taken a step back and thought about it beforehand, maybe you wouldn't have said that thing. So I really would encourage all of our listeners to establish some sort of step back policy. Right? I've heard of people saying, hey, you need to take 10 seconds. I've heard 30 seconds. I don't know what the magic number is, but having some sort of policy where you say, okay, when we're making big decisions or even just the small everyday decisions, I'm going to take some time to think, what's the right thing to do here? What's the good thing to do? Because I think if we can really do this, if we can take that step back, we're setting up our families for spiritual success.
Yeah. Taking time to think is so important. Stepping back, I love that. I think the challenge is not knowing to do it in the moment, but actually like remembering to do it or putting in that policy in place so that you can be able to take a breath, take a beat, whatever that means for you. Taking time to think about what is good and right. That should eliminate some things in our relationships, family and otherwise. It should eliminate competition. Like we're not trying to see who's better at being a Christian and within the family. We're not trying to see who's better at doing this task or that task. We're trying to work together. We're trying to do right by others. We're trying to like balance everything out. We talked about this a little bit before the podcast, but like I think if we're thinking about doing what is right by somebody else, then we're going to stop thinking about like, well, this is unfair to me because they got this, and this thing, or I gave them this, and this thing, and they aren't doing it back for me. They're not reciprocating in that way. That's not how goodness works. Goodness is, this is the right thing to do. So I'm going to do this thing because it's the right thing to do. And if we're focused on doing what's right, I think it will help us remove selfishness from the equation. That can always be a challenge. And that's always like one of the challenges in our walk with the Spirit is removing selfishness. But like we said, the encouragement from Paul is do nothing from selfishness or empty conceit, but with humility of mind. So we're going to bring ourselves down, humble ourselves, and put ourselves in a situation where we're thinking, what is the right thing to do? When we're truly thinking about that, I think we'll think about others in our life more and put them first and what they need, and maybe think about ourselves less. So as we kind of end and we reflect a little bit, and you're reflecting with us, is God's goodness changing you? Are you walking by the Spirit? Does your family see the goal of walking with goodness? Do they see that in you? What can we do during this next week to show more of God's goodness to those who are parts of our family? Does God's goodness reflect that? Does our goodness reflect that of God?
Thank you for listening to the Honest Reflection Podcast. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Look forward to reflecting with you again next week.